And we are in the chapter Lessons for Monks and Householders. And last week, Manilal was talking to the master about how to meditate and where we should meditate on. And if you remember, the master said that the heart is a splendid place for meditation. And one of the reasons he was asking, and some other devotees asked Mother at one time too, because there's really two places. I mean, there's lots of different types of meditation, but in general, the mostly you either do here in the middle of the forehead or the tip of the nose, they're kind of close to the same, or in the heart. And Ramakrishna here is telling them really any place you can choose anywhere, but he says the heart is a splendid place. And Holy Mother says the heart is a good place because she said it's safe there. One of the devotees or one of the disciples was asking her about, telling her that he was having terrible headaches, that he had developed some severe headaches. And she asked him, where do you meditate? And he said, oh, I meditate with my, in my forehead there. And she said, oh, well, put it in the heart instead, and that won't happen. That'll take care of that problem. So it's safer to place your attention in the heart. And also in the heart is really where divine love comes into the manifest world, as it were, in my own words, I guess, that they talk about that little fountain the size of a thumb that's there in the heart chakra, that through which the spirit, I guess, comes into manifestation. I don't know that stuff. I'm not interested in being a spiritual biologist, but it's great to sit there and find that fountain in love. And really you do that by thinking of things that you love deeply. And when you feel that sense of love, abstract it, stop looking at the object that you love and start paying attention to the love that's emanating and follow it. That will take you to the shrine of the heart. That will take you to what I like to think of as the unchanging absolute. Where love and presence are one, and they just sit there. And from that vantage point, you then observe the mind and body, and it's easier from that vantage point to know to experience the separateness, to experience that you are not the mind and not the body. And so sometimes if you're up here, you might be in mind, and it's more difficult to separate it out. So he was talking to him all about that, and now he's talking about two different forms of meditation. He says there are two kinds of meditation, one on the formless God and the other on God with form. Right now, okay, but meditation on the formless God is extremely difficult, he says. Why? Because it's formless. You don't have an object to focus on. You don't have something to put your concentration on. So it makes it very difficult. And that's why God incarnates. That's why he becomes Buddha or Rama or Jesus. So he puts a handle on himself, as it were, so that you can approach the beloved. And it's through the incarnation that we are able to fall in love, because the incarnation is always the highest manifestation of love that's possible with a form. And so they come and live a life of perfect love, perfect compassion, to allow us to fall in love with them. And then what happens is you have this form of God, and you have the meditator on the form or in relationship with that form. And between you grows love, right? And so you don't necessarily merge into the form of God. That wouldn't really work. One, because it's partial understanding. Even as an incarnation, you can't know everything about an incarnation. It's very deep. And you have a wrong conception of yourself, just to begin with. You think you're a body-mind. You think you're separate and apart from God. So you'll have two incomplete perceptions of God. So they're not going to merge this one into that one or that one into this one. What happens is that relationship that develops between you, that love that grows there, is God. And so the two inadequate conceptions of God and self then merge into that divine relationship, that love that becomes the cord or that which binds them into a oneness together. So there's two kinds. The formless is extremely difficult. He says in that meditation, you must wipe out all that you see or hear. You contemplate only on the nature of your inner self. And the reason that's so difficult is because you are that which you are meditating on, and you can't objectify yourself. And so really, it's just a profound silence where you actually simply continue to become aware of your awareness. And you can only almost intuit that, because it can't be separate from you. It's like trying to study your face without a mirror. You try to intuit what it looks like because you've never seen your face. And so it is, and it can't be, again, it can't be objectified. You can't put it in front of you and look at it. And we say this quite often because this is really what makes spiritual life very unique in that sense, is that everything else we go out and learn, which means we put it in front of our senses, whether it's our eyes or ears or touch or whatever, smell, and we observe it, we look at it, we study it from all of its different angles, and all the things that we learn, we put into relative boxes in our mind and draw lines between them and everything else that we're learning to relate them all together. I always like to think that the mind is trying to create the intuitive one without a second that we know, but it's trying to do it after breaking that singularity into 5 pieces through the senses and stacking it all over the mind, and then trying to reconstruct oneness, which it's not able to do. It's terribly incapable of such a thing. And so we can't do that in spiritual life, because the object, or that which we are trying to know, is the knower. Is that which is asking the questions, that which wants to know what it is, that which wants to know its nature. And so it becomes a very interesting exercise of peripheral vision, as it were, that you focus on that awareness and just keep being aware of being aware, which, goodness, it's an interesting attempt to do. And he says it's very difficult. Why? Because you're going to constantly be trying to use the mind, and you can't. You have to shut out all that you see and hear. I mean, all of the change, all of the changing world, which is all mind, has to be ignored, has to be withdrawn from. So he says, in that meditation, you must wipe out all that you see or hear. You contemplate only on the nature of your inner self. Meditating on his inner self, Shiva dances about. He exclaims, "What am I? What am I?" This is called Shiva Yoga. While practicing this form of meditation, one directs one's look to the forehead. It is a meditation on the nature of one's inner self after negating the world, following the Vedantic method of neti neti, which is you just saying everything that occurs to you in your mind, I'm not that. I'm not that. I'm not that. I'm not that. Because the self can't be named, right? And it brings you ultimately to that which can't have a name, can't be identified as an attribute, because you as yourself are infinite. Just as a small exercise to play with that, try describing yourself from the inside out, right? And immediately you run into a problem. There's a lot of infinities in there, and they don't break into pieces very easily. So that's why most of us describe ourselves from the outside in. We start with our hair color, our age, our gender, those things, what we do for a living. And then we'll get a little bit into the mind, what we like to do and what we like to see and whatnot. But nobody describes their experience of being from the inside out as who they are. So he says there's
we are trying to find out a higher self.
Yeah, well, yes, there's not a difference. The lower self is just an idea in the mind, and we're trying to detach from that one, trying to not let the mind tell us who we are, and to try and experience ourselves directly. What are you when nothing is telling you what you are? When you're not your own mind, not your thoughts, not your senses. You're trying to put yourself in an absolutely quiet mind where nobody's saying anything, so that you can be completely undefined as you are and know who you are. And that knowing is a very different knowledge than the relational knowledge of mind, of head. It's a knowing it's a knowing that cannot be translated into speech. but it's a knowing. You will know what you are, but you cannot employ the mind or employ the senses to describe or talk about what you are, because the real you, again, why? We talk about it a lot. The real you does not fit into those triads, those three triads: time, space, causation, past, present, future, subject, object, verb. Okay, and so since you don't fit into any of those categories, the mind cannot conceive of you, which is why we don't go to the mind to find out who we are. So he says there's another form of meditation known as the Vishnu Yoga. The eyes are fixed on the tip of the nose. Half the look is directed inward and the other half outward. This is how one meditates on God with form. Sometimes Shiva meditates on God with form and dances. At that time, he exclaims, Rama, Rama, and dances about. Right? So this is when we have that idea of a Jesus as our beloved, or as Rama, or as Ramakrishna, or Holy Mother, that we hold on to these divine manifestations of God. And in relationship, we keep one eye inward on the heart and the love and the mantra that's running, and then the other on the form itself, on the presence of God in there. Now he goes on to a little section here on the meaning of Om. It says, Sri Ramakrishna then explained the sacred word Om and the true knowledge of Brahman and the state of mind after attaining Brahmajnana. Brahmajnana means that knowledge that we were just talking about, that unutterable knowledge of Brahman, of the nature of Brahman. But it's not, again, something that cannot be poisoned by the tongue, cannot fit into a word. Master says, the sound Om is Brahman. The rishis and sages practiced austerity to realize that sound Brahman. After attaining perfection, one hears the sound of this eternal word rising spontaneously from the navel. What will you gain, some sages ask, by merely hearing this sound? You hear the roar of the ocean from a distance. By following the roar, you can reach the ocean. As long as there is the roar, there must also be the ocean. By following the trail of Om, you attain Brahman, of which the word is the symbol. That Brahman has been described by the Vedas as the ultimate goal. But such vision is not possible as long as you are conscious of your ego. A man realizes Brahman only when he feels neither I nor you, neither one nor many. Right? That means that you have pulled your sense of being completely out of mind and completely out of the body. And by doing that, you no longer have a particular reference. You are now in the infinite, we'll say the swirling infinities of what you are inside. Again, it's that knowledge of God, which is one of the early lessons that Ramakrishna teaches to M. He says, I'm not talking about the relative knowledge of books and schools, things that you can put in front of your senses and look at and learn attributes about. He says, I'm talking about that which cannot be put in front of the senses, or something you cannot approach as separate from yourself. And so that is why we have to not be aware of ego. Ego is when we have a connection or an attachment to our thinking. We think the thinking has something to do with us, and we think that we originate our thoughts, both of which are not true. The mind is just an organ that excretes that thought, as we've talked about before. A man realizes Brahman only when he feels neither I nor you. So there's no separateness. You don't see other, because you must have an ego to see other. And an ego is a construct. An ego is what happens when the universal self draws near to a body, or the dream self. You as a person, when you dream at night, your sense of self draws near to that particular object in the dream that you become, either another body or a fish or whatever it is you're dreaming yourself to be. And when that identity happens, then that form in that dream takes on a life of its own. It becomes you. You believe yourself to be that fish swimming happily in your dream, or whatever it is that you are. So when God draws near and attaches to something in that sense, it takes on the divine attribute, Satchitananda. And that is what gives form life, what gives form action, what gives form being. You know? Think of the sun and 10 jars filled with water. The sun is reflected in each jar, right? So the jars he's talking about are like these earthen jars, big round tops, and the sun's up there, and you're looking down at these jars, and on the top of all these jars, there's a sun. The sun is reflected in each jar. At first, you see one real sun and then 10 reflected suns. If you break 9 of the jars, there will remain only the real sun and one reflection. Each jar represents a jiva, an individual self, an individual soul. Following the reflection, one can find the real sun. Through the individual soul, one can reach the supreme soul. Through spiritual discipline, the individual soul can get the vision of the supreme soul. What remains when the last jar is broken cannot be described. Right? Now, this water in the jar and the self is the sun, that which you are in your highest form, in the formlessness. I mean, the real undescribable you. And actually, the jar that it's reflecting in is actually the jar of the mind. So the self reflects on mind. That's why you see your thoughts. They're a reflection of a part of you. And our problem is that all that we see, hear, taste, touch, and smell is us. But for some reason, we only identify with one particular object. Same thing like in the dream, right? If you want to wonder how that's possible, in the dream, you are actually the whole dream. We talk about this quite often. You are everything in your dream, and everything in your dream has been created by your mind stuff, right? Really by Brahman, because Brahman can manifest as anything. It becomes wood, it becomes water, it becomes metal, it becomes sky, air, all of those things, takes those forms. And in your dream, even though you are everything in there, for some odd reason, you just identify with one thing in that dream and then experience the rest of the dream, which is yourself, through that one perspective. And so it is in the real world. We actually, they say, God is everywhere present and always perfect, and thou art that. So you are everywhere present. And the whole dream is a direct manifestation of the divine self. But for some reason, you just think that you're who you are, who you seem to be right now, right? You don't think you're me. I don't think I'm you, but that is the ultimate truth of it. All right. So when that last jar is broken, which means when the mind reaches that silence, when there's nothing telling you anything, that knowledge of self becomes apparent. You're no longer in a state of distraction and wrong identity. You know who you are, not intuitively, but just by being. I mean, again, we're going to run out of words because it's a very high state and there are no words to describe it, which is why we're always confused, because we're always trying to find in mind what we are. But we have to throw the mind away, and then it becomes self-evident who we are without learning anything. Why would you have to learn who you are? It's who you are. He says the jiva at first remains in a state of ignorance. He is not conscious of God, but of the multiplicity. And this is that whole exercise that you do by identifying with a particular, then you become aware of everything else. The lamp is only separate from you because you've defined it that way. So you run around the world of multiplicity, but really it's the dream, and you are the dreamer, and the whole dream is within you. He sees many things around him. On attaining knowledge, right, and that's capital K knowledge there, you'll notice. When you attain knowledge, that is that knowledge which is not learned, that knowledge which cannot be described. It's just simply a knowing, intuitive and spontaneous. There's no breaking it into a description. On attaining this knowledge, he becomes conscious that God dwells in all beings. Right? It's like if you're in the dream, first you have to be aware that you're in the dream, then it becomes a lucid dream. And when you're in a lucid dream, you know that you're in a dream, and you know the nature of the dream is unreal, and that things are not there. And as you think about it more and more in the dream, you begin to understand, wow, this is all me. This mind is creating all of this in real time. And I am arbitrarily identified with this particular point of perspective, but in reality, I am the whole. So on attaining knowledge, becomes conscious that God dwells in all beings and all the things in the dream. Suppose a man has a thorn in the sole of his foot. He gets another thorn to take out the first one. In other words, he removes the thorn of ajnana, ignorance, by means of the thorn of jnana, of knowledge. But on attaining vijnana, which is that highest knowledge, he discards both thorns, right? So we use the mind for our practice. We use it to analyze, okay, well, if I'm in a dream, then that means I'm this whole dream. And if I'm this whole dream, that means I'm not a particular. And if I'm not a particular, on and on and on and on, like that, we use our mind to discern and to kind of try and untangle our ignorance. And then when we do actually get to that point where we've separated ourselves from body, mind, and understand that we're not a particular of any kind, and we remove all of our ideas of attributes, the neti, I'm not this, and I'm not this, and I'm not this, we back in to this capital K knowledge. It's still never in front of the senses. It's never something that we think about. We literally back out of the mind and back into God. And I use back because of that. Not in front of your senses. It's backing into what you are before everything else. Then he talks intimately with God day and night. It is no mere vision of God, right? And so this is a knowledge of communion. And it's a communion in its mature state in silence. There is nothing happening. There's an isness, a deeply profound and beautiful sense of love, sense of fullness, sense of contentment, sense of bliss. One that will ultimately, as you completely fall into it, will leave you in ecstasy, shut down the body mind, because they cannot contain it. They can't even take the amount of energy that's going through you at that point, that's being released from that lack of any boundary, the lack of any attribute. Then he talks intimately with God day and night. It is no mere vision of God. And you'll know that when it happens. You'll see the difference between looking at a thought and being self. Let's not even put self in there, just being. Right? There is a profundity to being that cannot be mistaken for a thought or a thinking. And that cannot really be described, can't really be talked about. He who has merely heard of milk is ignorant, right? So those of us, we've just heard of God. We've heard of the soul. We've heard of all these things, but we've just heard of it. He who has seen milk has a knowledge, right? It's a lowercase k, so he means relative knowledge. We've looked at milk, we've tasted milk. So through the senses, we discern what milk is. So we have a little bit higher of knowledge of it because we've seen and tasted it. He says, but he who has drunk milk and been strengthened by it has vijnana, has the highest knowledge, right? That been strengthened. It's become part and parcel of yourself. The separation is not there. The milk is no longer in a container in front of you that you're looking at. The milk is now part of you. You've had a drink of it, and now you understand the real nature of milk, as it were, for this observation. But he who has drunk this milk and been strengthened by it has attained vijnana, this highest knowledge. Thus the master described his own state of mind to the devotees. He was indeed a vijnani. The master to the devotees. There is a difference between a sadhu endowed with jnana, or knowledge, and one endowed with vijnana, that highest knowledge, supreme knowledge. The jnani sadhu has a certain way of sitting. He twirls his mustache and asks the visitor, well, sir, have you any questions to ask? But the man who always sees God and talks to him intimately has an altogether different nature. He's sometimes like an inert thing, sometimes like a ghoul, sometimes like a child, and sometimes like a madman. Right. And so we look at those. I think he's going to talk about it here down below. But this idea of being like a ghoul means that you don't have any sense of the purity and impurity, dirty and clean kind of thing. Is it Hride, Greg, or is it that ran after that man that was eating in the junk in the dump and sharing the food with the dog, and they were both there, and I think it was either Hride or that. Well, anyway, runs after him and wants to learn something from this Gyani. Ramakrishna, of course, sees this guy doing that, and he's like, "Oh, mother, please don't give me that kind of knowledge. I don't want to be in the dump sharing food, bad food with dogs." So the man tries to run off, and Hride runs after him and asks him, wants some teaching. And finally, the guy stops, and he's sort of short, and he turns to him and says, "What do you want?" And Hride just folds his hands, and the man tells him, when you can see this ditch water, and this is that ditch water in India, where there's raw sewage running in the ditch and everything else running in that ditch. He says, when you can see no difference between the water in this ditch and the water running in the Ganges, the pure Ganges, then you've reached knowledge, right? Because you've come to understand. Imagine looking at that in a dream. Okay, so you're dreaming of this ditch water, and you're dreaming of the ocean, of the Ganges. What are you actually seeing? You're seeing the mind stuff, or Brahman, that has become this water and become this water, but you know that it is actually mind stuff. It actually is dream stuff. It is not water of any kind. And when you know that, not think that, but when you know that, then that is the highest knowledge. That is vijnana. So when you actually begin to see that everything around you at this very moment is merely mind stuff, showing you a symbol for what it knows, perhaps from the senses, perhaps from something else. We don't know where that information comes from. We can't validate where the senses get their information from, or what the senses are actually. And so we've talked about that many times, and it's my favorite thing to talk about, because I'm blown away that it's so easy to actually know as a fact that you've never seen or experienced the outside world, right? That light hits, again, that same old thing I go through. That light hits your eyes, and it doesn't go to the brain. All that goes to the brain is some biochemical information, possibly electrical. I don't know the nature of it, but it goes to the brain. And the brain takes that information and creates your symbol for light, which is what you're looking at when you look at a light bulb right now. But that light that's illuminating your mind is not actually from that light bulb, because that light bulb can't get in there. So that symbol illuminates your mind. And what is actually illuminating your mind? It is divine consciousness, the light of consciousness. And we know from Eckhart Tolle that light of consciousness is of the nature of love itself. And so light is love. So you can understand these things, because it's the same with what you hear. What you hear doesn't actually get into the brain. It vibrates there in your eardrum. And whatever the process is, that gets encoded. You get that encoding inside, and then the mind creates sound. It creates a symbol for sound. And you say, well, it came from the outside world. My eye is looking at the outside world. Until you come to understand that your eye is as much a symbol created by the mind for the source of light as your ear is a created symbol for the source of the sound. We have no idea where that comes from or what that is. We just merely assume what the mind says is true. We're looking at a world of symbols. And that's what we live in. We live in a world, a mind, more than a world. And as we come to know that, it becomes easier to see how these spiritual truths may in fact be spiritual truths. That it's not just somebody on a crazy trip writing down really weird ideas, really far out things. So that is the ghoul. The ghoul is the one who doesn't see good and bad, doesn't see clean and unclean, doesn't pay attention to it, so he can be a madman sitting there eating in the dump with it and sharing his food with the dog quite happily. He sees the water in the ditch with all of that impurity in it and the water in the Ganges as being the same mind stuff, the same Brahman, and does not need to distinguish between them. And then he says, sometimes like a child, right? A child doesn't have deep attachments. The child's very much spontaneous, very much in the moment, is very innocent and very pure. And so he's childlike. You see how a child can be, how pure it is. The best way I like to think about it is that one time there's a YouTube video where the Pope is standing on the stage, right? We've talked about this before also. Pope is standing on the stage, he's giving a lecture. This is a real video. And this small boy, a toddler age, comes wandering out onto the stage, gets away from his mother's hands or grip backstage, comes wandering out onto the stage while the Pope is speaking. And behind the Pope is the Pope's throne, the big fancy chair. And that child walks over, puts both hands up on the chair, and he throws one leg up on it and throws the other leg up on it and ends up squirming around and sitting in the throne of the Pope right there behind them. And the Pope at this point, everybody's chuckling in the audience, and the Pope turns around and looks at the boy and he laughs and smiles. All right. If you or me had walked out from behind that stage and sat down in the Pope's chair, we would have been tackled to the floor, right? Why? Because our intention would have been presumptuous and egotistical and improper, right? It would have been a violation. But the child is not playing any of those games. The child is just being. And he's walking out and sees this beautiful big chair. What a wonderful place to sit down. So with no presumption, no egoism, climbs up into that chair and just sits there and enjoys it. And the Pope laughs, the audience laughs. And when the security guard comes out, they don't throw him on the floor and cuff him. They pick him up and carry him gently back to his mother backstage. No harm done. So that's what it is to be realized as a child and acting like a child in that moment. No egoism, no intentions, just spontaneous manifestation of a very pure love and a very pure wisdom within us, right? And so sometimes like a child and sometimes like a madman, right? Just anything goes, anything happens. You have no more consciousness of, oh, what are people going to think of me? Or, oh, is this right? Or, oh, is this wrong? Because you're living in a spontaneous manifestation of an infinite ideal. And it comes out in every which way. There's no definitions for you anymore. You are that infinite, and it just comes as it comes. When he is in samadhi, he becomes unconscious of the outer world and appears inert, right? So he's completely absorbed in the inner world. He's not taking in any more information from the senses. He knows it to be unreal. He knows that the whole world is within him like the dream, and that his senses are not a true source of information. He sees everything to be full of Brahman consciousness, right? That's what we mentioned. He sees everything is made of dream stuff. He knows that it is God that has become all of this, that there is no such thing as wood and water and metal and air and fire and earth and all those things, that those are all simply manifestations of Brahman, manifestations of mind stuff or dream stuff, to just try and get a way to think about it. Therefore, he behaves like a ghoul, because he knows there's no difference between these things, that they're all made of the same thing, as it were. One's not clean and one's not dirty, and none of it is separate from each other. He just sports in that oneness with that knowledge. He is not conscious of the holy and the unholy. He does not observe any formal purity. To him, everything is Brahman. He is not aware of filth as such. Even rice and other cooked food, after a few days, become like filth. So he's kind of pointing there to another part of our reality, in that, we look at rice and we think we're looking at rice, but rice doesn't always stay rice. Rice will turn into potting soil, and then that will grow a tree, and then that will, fall to the ground and get burned, and then that will be ash, and then that ash gets put into cement, and then it becomes a building. So all forms in this natural world that we live in are constantly changing, constantly morphing. And so one of the parts of our discernment and discrimination is to watch that process and realize that nothing is as it seems, but that there is something that becomes everything. How is it that I can pick a flower and then have that flower rot into dirt, and then that dirt can become all kinds of things. I remember walking down the street, I think it was near Greg's house actually, and there was this beautiful, bright, ultra red poppy that was growing out of the ground there. It was, the color was so vivid. I just sat there staring at it. And it occurred to me that that poppy had somehow made that color out of sunshine, water, and dirt. And I sat there trying to fathom, how could a plant be such a master of the elements that it could take water, sunshine, and dirt and create the most vibrant red, most vibrant yellow center, little black stamens, a green stem, all from those three elements, right? And that's the magic of the divine. It can take anything, this substance, this Brahman, this dream stuff, and it can manifest this flower. It can manifest a car, it can manifest a piece of wood, it can manifest a star, it can manifest everything that you're looking at right now. And it's quite fun to sit there. And this is that practice I was sharing that I've been doing now for a month, a little over a month, that really is having a beautiful effect on me. And that is to get up in the morning and sit on the edge of my bed and to sit there and remind myself, this is the dream of the beloved. I'm walking through my beloved's dream, and that everything in here is not different from me. I am made of this same dream stuff, this same mind stuff, as my bed, as the carpet, as my computer, as the window, as everything I can see outside that window. And just sit there and hold that thought in my mind. I'll touch things. I'll touch my bed. I'll feel my hair, and constantly rekindling that idea. This is all the same thing. This is that my beloved who has become all of this. For what? For a play, for a movie, whatever. Who knows what the reason is. And he says, and again, he is like a madman. People notice his ways and actions and think he's insane because he's not following the normal process of thought. He's no longer in time-space causation within his experience. He's no longer bound by body. He knows himself to be everything at once. He's not taking in the information of the senses because he's taking in himself always. There is no separateness. And so the behavior that inspires can manifest as almost any kind of behavior. And he does in fact look like a madman to us. Or sometimes he's like a child, no bondage, no shame, no hatred, no hesitation, or the like. One reaches this state of mind after having the vision of God, after seeing the divine. When a boat passes by a magnetic hill, its screws and nails become loose and drop out. Lust, anger, and other passions cannot exist after the vision of God. Oh my gosh. I think we've already done this section. Sorry. It is no longer possible for the man who has seen God to beget children and to perpetuate the creation. When a grain of paddy is sown, it grows into a plant, but a grain of boiled paddy does not germinate. He who has seen God retains his eye only in name. No evil can be done by that eye. It's a mere appearance, like the mark left on the coconut tree by a branch. The branch has fallen off, only the mark remains. I said to Keshab Sen, give up the ego that makes you feel that I am the doer. I am teaching people, right? So this is a good clue. This is egoism, the sense of doership, right? So you think that you're the doer, and that truth which follows that immediately is that then because you are the doer, that you are responsible for the doing. And if you're responsible for the doing, then you must be punished for the bad things and you must be rewarded for the good things. That's egoism. Egoism is when we subject our free self to bondage, to the bondage of responsibility through doership. Well, that's when we, what I call, put life on a line. We have a past, present, and a future. We live in time, space, causation. We live in that effect. Everything is an effect. of a cause. And anytime that you place a boundary on an action, you're going to have cause and effect, right? But if you expand that boundary, you come to realize that every effect is a cause of something else. And so that everything is both a cause and an effect. There is no such thing of something that is just an effect and something that is just a cause. And so this is when our world, our thinking world, kind of collapses. And that is why egoism always is about boundaries, because it can only maintain the delusion of a world of multiplicity and karma and doership by having boundaries. And this removal of boundaries, which is this seeing God in all things, or understanding that the nature of all material is the divine, that the game goes on. As soon as you come to the point of realization, which is realizing that, oh, well, oh my God, God is everywhere present and always perfect, and I am that. There's not a thinker, there's not a listener, there's not a body, there's not an external and an internal, that all of this world is in me. We know that from Vivekananda when he was in the city of Alameda in the Bay Area, and he says, I am not in Alameda. Alameda is in me. You see, from an ego perspective, you will place yourself as a particular within the dream. As a man of knowledge, you know that you are the sleeper in the bed and that the dream is within you. You are not within the dream. And so that is realization there. So Thakur is saying to Keshav, he says, give up this sense of ego that makes you feel that you're the doer, that you're teaching people. Keshav said to me, sir, then I cannot keep the organization, right? We have an attachment here being betrayed. He likes being in charge of an organization. He likes being in charge of he likes being a Swami. He likes being a president as such. And thereupon I said to him, well, give up the wicked ego. One doesn't have to renounce the ego that makes one feel I am the servant of God or I am his devotee. One doesn't develop the divine ego as long as one retains the wicked ego. If a man is in charge of the storeroom, the master of the house doesn't feel responsible for it, right? So he's saying, yes, Thakur says in other places that it's nearly impossible for us as normal folks to completely efface ourselves of egoism. He says, so get it as thin as you possibly can, right? By becoming a very loving and caring person who thinks of others first and who is always aware of the presence of God in the people around him and treats them accordingly, right? So he's still going to have that sense of separateness, but he's going to use it in a beautiful way. He's going to use it to relieve suffering. He's going to use it to show compassion. He's going to use it to create community and harmony and love as a manifestation. The wicked ego is the ego that's attached to body-mind and feels that the desires of body-mind are its own, and then goes and takes food from someone else because the body is hungry, my body's hungry, and tries to then collect things to find a sense of security in a finite world, which can never happen. You can never own enough stuff to be secure. You can never be happy enough to be content. You can never be rich enough to be all powerful. And so we cannot recreate our infinite nature in the finite world, which is why the scriptures tell you, stop going out through the senses, because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to recreate your intuitive knowledge of yourself. You're trying to create it in the world of senses that you think you are. And you won't be able to create an infinite thing in a finite thing. And so that's why we don't go out through the senses, and why we renounce and why we discern, because we turn inward and we find that there was nothing to get. There was nothing outside of ourself, that it was only dream material that we're eating, and it's never going to fill us up. So he says, thereupon I said to him, well, give up that wicked ego, the one based on body mind, that doesn't have to renounce the ego that makes one feel I am the servant of God, right? If you train it, you ripen that ego. That's how Ramakrishna talks about it. You ripen that ego by coming to a knowledge that I'm not the hungers and thirsts of the body. I'm not the instability and the constant change of the mind. I am a constant, and that constant is love and wisdom and being. And so I'm going to act from that part, and I'm going to use the body mind to express this knowledge of myself in the world. right? And so you're no longer trying to take, you're now a giver, and that is your natural state. And if you can find that state within yourself, then your own fulfillment and your own bliss become a byproduct of being. It's no longer something that you seek or search for. It comes of its own accord as a byproduct. As soon as you put it in front and center, you've awakened the wicked ego, right? And that's not where we want to go. So we allow our own fulfillment and our own happiness to be a byproduct of living according to our nature, which is love and wisdom through our being. Right? He says, if a man is in charge of the storeroom, the master of the house doesn't feel responsible for it, right? So he's just talking about that freedom that comes from knowing the beloved and expressing the beloved. You're no longer going to be, you can be trusted. The master of the house doesn't have to worry about you as such. All right. Let's go through one more here. To the devotees, you see, my nature is changing on account of this injury to my arm. It is being revealed to me that there is a greater manifestation of God in man than in other created beings. God is telling me, as it were, I dwell in men. Be merry with men, meaning mankind. Among men, God manifests himself in still greater degree in a pure-souled devotee. That is why I feel a great longing for Narendra and Rakal and other such youngsters. One often sees small holes along the edge of a lake. Fish and crabs accumulate there. Just so, there is a greater accumulation of divinity in mankind, or in humanity, as it were. It is said that man is greater than the salagram. Man is Narayana himself. If God can manifest himself through an image, then why not through a man also? Right? If God can be manifested through the statue of Shiva and realized, why can God not manifest through human beings and be realized? Right? And that's why he says he comes to this knowledge that the highest form of worship is to worship the God that is present in everything. Right? And we worship that through offerings of love, through offerings of compassion and kindness, thinking always of the betterment of others. And that is the highest form of worship. God is born as man for the purpose of sporting as man. Rama, Krishna, and Chaitanya are examples. By meditating on an incarnation of God, one meditates on God himself. Right? Ramakrishna says that an incarnation of God can be described as a hole through Maya, through which God can be seen. Right? It's like looking through a hole in the wall out into an infinite expanse. So in a weird way, that infinite expanse obviously can't be pushed through that hole, but that hole can reveal that infinite expanse to you. And so, a Jesus or a Rama or a Krishna, it's not that God has been squeezed into that one body, and that's the whole of it right there. But through that body, you can look through at the infinite expanse of God, which is behind it, right? No action of that body, no word of that body would limit your understanding of the beloved. And that's why he says one who's meditating on the incarnation is meditating on God himself, because the incarnation is not a personality or a point in history. An incarnation is an absence of any egoism, an absence of any of the limiting adjuncts of being. He's just manifested a body just with enough ajnana or enough ignorance to maintain a form, but no more beyond that. So that when you're looking at God, you're looking at Ramakrishna, you're actually looking not at a person, not at a man in history, but you're looking through a hole at the infinite expanse of God that is being expressed through that hole, being manifest through that hole. Bhagavan Das, Brahmo devotee, arrived, and we'll pick up with that next week. Here. And turn off the recorder.